If you're having trouble keeping your houseplants alive, then this video is for you. Knowing how to take care of plants is a learning process, and there's so many factors that it can be hard to know exactly what went wrong when one of your plants dies. Luckily for you, I have many years of experience taking care of houseplants as a job, and I've made every mistake there is to make, believe me. So I'm going to tell you the 5 most common houseplant mistakes and exactly how to fix them. Make sure you watch until the end though, because the last one is by far the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to houseplants, and just changing this one simple thing is going to dramatically improve the health of your plants and drastically increase the odds of you being able to keep any houseplants alive. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when buying plants and deciding where to put them in their house is not considering how much light that those specific plants need. There are some plants that need very bright, indirect sunlight to do well, and that there are some that need low light, and they will actually burn if they're put in too much light. So if you put a peace lily, for example, in a sunny south-facing window, then the leaves are going to burn. And on the other end, if you put a cactus in a dark room, it's going to slowly die without any direct sunlight on it. I think it's best when you go to buy plants that you have a specific place or places in mind that you want to put these plants. Most plants will do well indoors if you place them near a window in bright indirect light. But if you want to put plants in either a super sunny spot or somewhere, away from any window in low light, then you really need to consider which plants will do well in those specific conditions. And by the way, I do have a video on the 20 best low light houseplants. So make sure to check that out if you have some really low light areas in your house. And there's some good suggestions on that video for what to use in those kind of low light spots. But if you're new to houseplants and you're looking to add some greenery to your home, just make sure you know that you can't just put any plant anywhere. Specific plants have specific light requirements, and this is the first thing that you need to consider when buying houseplants. So once you've bought some beautiful houseplants and you've placed them all in good spots with the right amount of light, there are unfortunately still many more mistakes that you could make. So next I will tell you the next potential mistake that you're going to want to consider when buying houseplants and taking care of houseplants. Alright, so another big mistake that people make when taking care of plants inside their homes is they don't consider the humidity levels that certain plants will need to flourish. Most houseplants, they come from warm regions of the world, closer to the equator, which is why we grow them indoors as houseplants. If we left them outside, they would likely, depending on where you live, eventually freeze and die in the winter. These aren't plants that come from, more northern climates. Generally, houseplants, they come from 2 specific kinds of environments. They either come from a desert kind of region or from a tropical region, a tropical climate. So if you have houseplants such as, say, cacti or the euphorbias like the green pencil cactus, then or any type of succulents, then these are likely coming from dry desert regions of the world, and that is something that needs to be considered when taking care of them. These types of plants need very low humidity because they come from such dry regions, and so you don't want to put them near a humidifier, near a sink, or somewhere where water might be splashing on them, or if you have a window in your bathroom with the shower in it where the humidity is very high, then you don't want to put these kind of desert plants in those spots. They're not going to do well in high humidity. They come from the desert and they need low humidity. So even if you have them in the appropriate amount of light, if the humidity is too high, then they're not going to last very long. And the opposite is also true of tropical houseplants. Plants like palms, monsteras, philodendrons, ferns, stuff like this, they all come from tropical jungle-like climates that are always very warm and very wet. So they like to be grown in high humidity. So if you have plants like this, make sure they're not in the direct line of a fan or an air conditioning or heating vent, because that air blowing directly on them, it's going to keep the humidity low, and it's not going to be good. You know, it's gonna keep that air flow, and it's gonna dry them out. So that's a big thing to consider when placing these more tropical kind of plants. And it can be good to even put a humidifier near plants like this, or you can even just push them all very close together, and that will keep the humidity level up for a while you water the plants, or after you water the plants. If they're all really close together, they're going to be all wet and putting off water, and that's another good way to keep the humidity levels up. For other plants such as ferns or alocasias as well, the humidity is so important that it can really help to mist them down every few days with a spray bottle. With stuff like ferns or alocasias, it's absolutely essential that you keep the humidity high. So I think it's best to just spray them down, mist them down every couple of days. So make sure that you consider the environment that a plant is native to, and then basically just try to replicate those conditions as much as you can in your house, in the area that you have those plants. But even if you have your plants in the proper environment when it comes to sunlight, when it comes to humidity, if you make this next mistake, you could still lose all your plants at once. So make sure you pay attention to this next one. Alright, so if you have a bunch of nice plants in your house, the last thing that you want is for them to become infested with bugs that can quickly spread throughout your house and potentially kill all of your plants. Plant pests such as fungus gnats or mealybug can be incredibly annoying to deal with once they get out of control. And other plant pests and bugs such as whitefly or spider mite, they can spread to all of your plants and even kill them altogether. This is a problem that you don't want to ever deal with, believe me. And I think the real mistake in this regard is letting your plants ever even have the potential to have a bug infestation. So the best thing to do when it comes to plant pests is to always be preventatively treating these plants for bugs and keeping them clean, so that these kind of bugs and pests are not going to ever get on them in the first place. If you don't have pets, then the best thing to do is to mix in some granular systemic pesticide into the soil every couple months or so. And this is something that the plant is going to absorb up from the soil, absorb up into the roots, bring up into the plant, and it's going to make the plant itself toxic to bugs. And if you apply this stuff regularly, the chance of ever getting any bugs on any of your plants is basically zero. You know, if anything gets on those leaves and eats any part of the plant whatsoever, then they're going to die. So that's the most effective thing to do. And if you do not have pets, I would highly recommend just using this systemic pesticide. If you do have pets, then you shouldn't use it. Basically, this pesticide is going to make the plant mildly toxic to anything, so animals, small kids, anything. If there's any potential for anything other than bugs to eat the leaf of the plant, then you do not want to use the systemic pesticide. But if this isn't an option for you, then there's still many other ways to keep bugs off of plants. And what I would do is just spray them all down about once a month with something that will kill bugs, but that is otherwise safe. So I would recommend a few different things for this. Neem oil, horticultural dormancy oil, a mix of water and Dawn dish soap, or a mix of water and rubbing alcohol. So these are all treatments that will be totally safe to use inside your home, but will be very effective at keeping bugs away or killing any bugs that might have started getting onto the plants. Any of these options will work great, and the ideal thing to do is to switch off between these different sprays. So, sometimes bugs can become resistant to neem oil or to soap or whatever. So switch off. Spray them with neem oil one day, spray it with just plain water the next day, spray it with rubbing alcohol the next day, spray it with Dawn dish soap the next day. Just keep alternating between different methods of treating bugs, and that's the best thing for if you have bugs on the plants already. If you're just keeping them clean and doing it preventatively, maybe just switch off every couple weeks. 1 week, just spray them down with neem oil, and a couple weeks later, spray it with rubbing alcohol. You don't need to do it that often if you haven't ever seen any bugs on there. If you just do it every once in a while, it should prevent bugs from ever getting on there in the first place. But even if you've done everything right and you haven't made any of these 3 mistakes that I've talked about so far, if you make this next mistake, you're still going to have a lot of trouble keeping any of your plants alive. So one of the most common mistakes that I see or that I hear about when I talk to people about their houseplants, and a mistake that I certainly made when I first got into collecting houseplants, is watering them too much. It's very uncommon that I hear about people who seem to be underwatering their houseplants. It does happen occasionally when I talk to someone and they say, oh, I just throw like a cup of water on the plants every couple of weeks or something like that, which, obviously is not good either, but I don't hear this often. And when people ask me why their plants are dying and if they're watering them correctly, 9 out of 10 times they're overwatering them. So when you water your houseplants, the correct way to do it is to fully soak them when you do water them, but do that infrequently. So you do want to water them a lot when you water them, but most houseplants you're only going to need to water about once every 2 weeks. If you have something like a croton or a peace lily, you'll want to water them more often, like once a week. And if you have something like a snake plant or a ZZ plant, then you're going to water them probably just once a month. But for the most part, once every 2 weeks is going to work out just fine for the vast majority of houseplants. I think it's also best to just stick to a schedule when watering them. Rather than trying to determine, how wet the soil is and trying to feel the soil and figure out if they need water or not, then just water them on a schedule. So basically, I would say just say, oh, I always water these plants on Sundays. So every other Sunday, I water these plants, okay? And it just kind of takes the guesswork out of it. If you just stick to a schedule, you don't have to be trying to lift up the plant to see how heavy it is or sticking your hand as far into the soil as you can to see how wet it is. It just kind of takes the guesswork out of it. And if you stick to this schedule, it's honestly, I find that it works out better in the long run, as long as you are giving them, the right amount of water every time you do it. So I think just stick to a schedule. Don't try to even feel the soil or even worry about how wet it is, because if you're just doing once every 2 weeks, it's going to be dried out enough. And then the last thing to consider when it comes to watering houseplants is to make sure that they're not sitting in water. You don't want to have a plant that has a huge saucer under it that's always full of water. And you also don't want to ever put a houseplant in a pot that has no drainage at the bottom. So you got to make sure that you consider the water drainage as well, and that when you water it, some water is coming out the bottom, but enough that it kind of dries up after a day or two and it's not just sitting in water. but you also don't want water to never come out the bottom, and then you're never soaking the very bottom of the soil. So that's how you correctly water houseplants. For most stuff, just stick to once every 2 weeks, and really make sure you're soaking them all the way down to the bottom every time that you do water it. All right, so we're on to the last of these 5 big mistakes, and the next mistake is by far the biggest of them all, but it's also the easiest thing to change. When it comes to how you take care of your houseplants, this is a very simple change you can make, and if you do make this mistake, it's going to make any of these other mistakes much worse. It's going to affect everything. But if you listen to my advice and you don't make this last mistake, it's going to make the chances of any of these other things ever becoming a problem much lower. So if you do this, you're going to have to worry less about making any of these other mistakes. So do not miss this one. Here's the biggest houseplant mistake of all. Okay, so I know it sounds simple and not a big deal, but whether or not you fertilize your houseplants, it is the #1 factor in how healthy your plants are going to be and how easy it is going to be to keep them alive and to keep them looking good. I've had many jobs now taking care of houseplants for many years, and I can really say that regularly fertilizing the plants, it's the absolute biggest trick to easily keeping large numbers of plants alive. Plants are the same as people in this regard. If you're unhealthy and you never eat anything healthy and you get sick, it's going to hit you hard. But if you're living a healthy lifestyle, you're eating clean, you're taking vitamins, then that same sickness, it might not affect you very much. And the same is true of plants. If plants have never been fertilized and you make any of these other mistakes that I've talked about, it's going to become a problem very quickly, and it's going to affect the plant's health in a negative way very quickly. But if they've been regularly fertilized and they have all the nutrients that they need, it's going to take a long time before any of these other issues will cause any damage. So if a plant is never fertilized and it's too wet, it may start to die within just a few weeks. But if it has been properly fertilized and it's a little bit too wet, tends to be overwatered, or it's not in enough light, or it's in too much light, whatever, it may take months before it causes any issue and before you can see any damage. The plant, it's just going to be stronger and healthier, and it's going to be more able to adapt to unideal circumstances. A healthy plant will even be able to naturally fight off or deter bugs much more effectively than an unhealthy, unfertilized plant. So I would personally recommend fertilizing your houseplant every other watering. So if you're watering them once every 2 weeks, that would mean fertilize them once a month. And it's very important that you make sure you use a good organic fertilizer. If you use one of these synthetic fertilizers like Miracle-Gro, it may help for a short time, but it's going to eventually start to hurt the plants as these salts and the different chemicals build up in the soil. Over time, it will start to negatively affect the health of the plants. But if you're using an organic fertilizer, this is not going to happen. I personally use both Fox Farm Grow Big, which is very, very good. All the Fox Farm products, very high quality. And then the other one I use for houseplants is the MicroLife Biomatrix. And this is also just a tremendous fertilizer. And it's good for houseplants and even vegetables and other stuff outside. It's got very high nitrogen. And it even has some liquid seaweed in it. So MicroLife Biomatrix is one of the best. And of all the fertilizers that I've used, these two are the best. So I would highly recommend getting one of these two fertilizers, using them every other watering, and I think the results are going to speak for themselves. Your plant will not only be, darker green and growing faster and bigger, but it will be much less affected by any of these other potential mistakes you can make, and you don't need to worry about it so much. If you're just fertilizing all the time, then it's going to take a long time before any of these other mistakes might become a real issue. So that's it, my people. Make sure you fertilize your plants. It's very important, and make sure you don't make any of these 5 mistakes. I think that if you just follow what I've laid out here, you should have no trouble keeping any houseplants alive for years to come. So that's it. Thank you, my people. Thank you for watching. I love you guys very much. Please like and subscribe if you have not, and I will be back very soon. Love you guys.